Welcome back to another episode of Innovation for Entrepreneurs, the podcast that unlocks the secrets of successful product and service innovation and launch for businesses. I'm your host, Megan Anderson, innovationist, startup COO, and founder of Your Business Copilot, here to guide you through the exciting journey of entrepreneurship and innovation. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Innovation for Entrepreneurs. I'm really excited about today's segment and specifically today's guest because we're going back in time and we're taking some lessons from history to teach us how we continue to move forward in an innovative way in this world. And I think I have the perfect guest to help us work through that. And that guest is Clews. So Chris is now a keynote speaker and an author. All of his content is focused around 80s pop culture, which includes movies and music. And even though I wasn't born in the 80s, I was really close. And Chris, I can't believe that you're getting me to admit almost my age so early on in my podcast, but here I am. But I was a early 90s baby, and that means that the 80s was still fluent, and my parents had me watch a lot of movies and music in that era. So when we first met and you started pulling all of these life lessons and quotes from movies, it just was so awesome to bring me back to my childhood. So I really enjoyed it. So Chris wasn't always a keynote speaker and author. He actually was in the corporate world for over 20 years in marketing and made the leap into entrepreneurship. And so I really want to dive into his story. He can tell it best on, what brought him to that decision of going the entrepreneurship route. So, hi, Chris.
Hey, Megan, thanks for the intro. I truly appreciate it. And as I tell everyone who hosts a podcast and has me on, thank you for giving me the megaphone. I think for people out there that haven't been on a podcast before, it's very easy to just turn on your camera, have a mic, and show up. As the guest, the host, the person who's putting on the podcast has a lot of behind the scenes work that you don't see. So thank you for giving me the megaphone.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit more, maybe take us back where you were in corporate America. I have a lot of listeners that I think are still there and deciding on if they want to go the entrepreneurship route or maybe in that transition. So I love to hear more about your backstory and kind of how you got where you are today.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I grew up in the 80s, and I say that my formative years were, I was 10. I'm going to date myself now. I was 10 years old in 1980. So 10 to 19 were the 1980s for me. So I say everything I did in my life for the first time, good, bad, or indifferent, likely happened in the 80s. And so that's where I kind of started. And I did the corporate thing for 20 plus years, as you mentioned, in corporate marketing, about half or a little over half of those years in leadership roles. And I did enjoy marketing. I think there is something, though, and a lot of people out there who are in corporate may be able to relate to this. We talk a lot about the difference between like and love in a personal relationship. If you go back over the years and the people that you dated or have interacted with as very good friends, and you might say, I like this person, and making that leap to saying, I love this person, there's a canyon, a grand canyon between like and love. And the same goes for our professional world as well, in our careers. And it's great to say that you like what you do. It's rare to find somebody who says they love what they do. And I liked what I did for 20 plus years, and I love what I do now. And do you want me to tell you a little bit about how I got there?
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go there, I just want to say I love that for you. I hope everybody gets the chance to find that in life. So that's great to hear.
It took me a little while. And it takes a lot of people, it takes most people a little while to figure it out. And so I was actually in a job that, just as most of us have probably been there, it just wasn't working out for me. But to have to like move to another job, I know that it happens a lot more often today than it's say 30 or 40 years ago, where people stayed for 40 years, got their gold watch and moved on. People are accustomed to moving, but there's still a lot that goes into it emotionally for you, and the work that goes into saying, I'm not happy here and I've got to find something else. I was at that point, but I wasn't ready to actually jump yet. And so I'm having this kind of self-pity party of one at home, as I tend to do. And if you're watching this, my shirt, The Breakfast Club, one of my favorites, came on. I'd seen it, 100 times. I'd heard this one line from Bender, the criminal, the juvenile delinquent criminal, who said, screws fall out all the time. The world's an imperfect place. And I'd heard that line multiple times. I never really listened to it until that day. And I sat up and I said, my screws have fallen out. I'm in an imperfect place. What am I going to do? I can't just leave my job. I've got to figure something out here. And so there were a couple of more quotes. I really enjoy English literature and poetry. And there's Henry David Thoreau back in the 1840s, not the 1980s. But he said the mass of men, or we'll say the mass of people today, the mass of people lead lives of quiet desperation. And I was in that quiet desperation, and I had to find a way out. And so I took this idea of screws falling out, and I wrote a little article on what the Breakfast Club can teach us about problem solving. Screws fall out. The why is important, but it's how you put them back in that really matters. And I drove that theme through the article. And I posted it on LinkedIn, published it on LinkedIn through their articles. I'm not even sure they do that anymore. But anyway, had this huge response to it the next day. And I thought, wow, maybe I have something here. And I didn't let it go. So I did one on Ferris Bueller and work-life balance. And suddenly I thought, maybe I have something here. But still working this full-time job, traveling back and forth internationally. It was a fairly big job, but every free moment I had was dedicated to writing this first little book on what 80s pop culture can teach us about today's workplace. And there was a Oliver Wendell Holmes, another one, not from the 1980s. I'm going to paraphrase, but he said one of the saddest things is to see someone die with their song still inside of them. And so, I had this song in me. I didn't know what the lyrics were. And once I kind of figured out this little book that I wrote, I built a website, positioned myself as a speaker, and said, I can take this content, I think, and create a keynote presentation out of it, what 80s movies and 80s pop culture can teach us for life and work. And after 18 months of kind of burning the candle at both ends, any PTO I had, if I got hired to keynote speak, I used my PTO. Wasn't taking vacations. I was, using that for this thing that I wanted to be. And now I'm in front of you today, 6 years later, and I've spoken to, DHL, Visa, Duke Health, Penn Medicine, across the board, a lot of associations. I have 3 books now. Happy as I've ever been. I wake up every day just curious to what the day is going to bring me. Sometimes it brings me a lot. Sometimes it brings me a little, but that's okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's a great question. And you're right. Everybody has a different path to it. I happened to be 46 when I had this epiphany. I wasn't a 25-year-old entrepreneur. I was deep into my career. I will say that, there was another movie, The Outsiders, Johnny Cade, the character played by Ralph Macchio. The book's amazing too, by the way. And he said that you still have a lot of time to make yourself be what you want. And that was something that drove me as well, that I didn't have to be 25 or 30 or 35. I could be 46 and start an entirely new thing. But you're right in the sense that I didn't just walk away from a job and say, I'm just going to figure this out and go for it. I had a plan sort of in my mind, but the reality was that I wasn't ready. And I had to, with what I'm doing, where somebody might be an entrepreneur where they're creating a product. And once they get that product on the line and it's coming out and they're selling that product, they can start to make a decision on what they want to do. For me, I had to create all this content. My job, my next career was going to be dependent on how good my content was. Were people actually going to care about it? Were they going to care enough that they would pay to hear my content? And so that took a lot of work to have to create a content library before you actually walk away. And the other thing is, you say like some people, different financial situations. I mean, I had to assess where I was financially, and I had to say, how much of a runway will I give myself because when I make decisions in my life, I don't look back. I don't make a decision with a plan B in mind. This is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to make it work, and I'm not going to give up. And so I know that about me, and I had to build a runway that was long enough to allow me to do that because there was no plan B. There was no, if this doesn't work, then I'll take the content and try to do this with it. And there was definitely not I'll go back to the corporate world, because that's not going to happen. So I had to think strategically about financially, how much runway do I need to give myself, and B, build out this content and take advantage of the fact that I do have this job. And you're right, you have to have the mindset. You got to be able to compartmentalize. Somebody's paying you to do a job, and you owe it to them to make sure that you are 150% engaged in the job that they're paying you to do. That's number one and first and foremost. But when you're away from that job, that you need to get that 150% investment into yourself and who you want to be. Because ultimately, whoever you're working for, they did that one day. You know, whether it's a massive corporation, somebody started it, or it's a small, mid-sized business, and they made that decision one day that they were going to do this. And so, you should never feel guilty about taking that approach. You just have to make sure that you're giving as much effort into the job that somebody's expecting of you as you do the effort that you put into yourself to find that path that you want to blaze, or that trail you want to blaze, and go for it.
So yeah, you just touched on something that I think is really important. And if you worked in a leadership type role where you're driving your own work or other people's work in the corporate world, it is this big mindset shift where you're not working to meet deadlines. You have to create those for yourself. And so it can sometimes be challenging. We're here to speak truth, and it just is a different mindset. And I want to make sure that people understand that when they're jumping in to this entrepreneurship role. And do you have any tips on, how you continue to get through those blockers and continue to drive yourself forward in the work that you need to do for your own business?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, it's never, there's no guarantees that people are going to care enough about what you've created to actually make an investment in it. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, whatever the product or service is, even if it's yourself, you're the brand. And you have to go in, obviously, the positive, confident mindset. But there's a couple of things in here I want to touch on that come from 80s movies. And before I do, I want to say that there is this, I wake up every day kind of feeling like I did in 7th grade, where I'm excited because, I'm like putting my football pads on. I'm getting ready to go hit somebody and be hit on the football field, which I can't imagine doing today. But then when I was
careful.
Yeah, when I was 13 or 12, there was just no fear. It was excitement. I was excited. We couldn't wait to roll around, versus the fear of asking a girl to dance at the middle school dance, and not being able to peel myself off the wall to do it, or ask for a couples skate at the roller skating rink. That's a day in the life of an entrepreneur, at least for me, is that excitement and that fear. They're real. And both of them happen every single day. Just when you think you have things figured out. If you play golf, if anybody out there plays golf, it's very similar to a golf game. You have a great shot and you think, I got this figured out. You don't. The next 3 or 4 shots are really bad. And then you're trying to figure out what you did wrong. And then you have a great shot and it brings you back. So with the entrepreneur thing, there are 2 movies that I think about when we're talking about this particular piece of it. And one is when I talked about confidence. So there's a movie, Trading Places, with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd and Jamie Lee Curtis. Great comedy, a lot of social commentary in that movie. I think people don't realize how much social commentary was going on in 80s movies because they kind of blended it into the story, and it wasn't overt, but it was there. And in this movie, I won't get into the deep into the plot, but there's a moment where Eddie Murphy's character, Billy Ray Valentine, is getting ready to start this first day at this commodities brokerage, this massive building. The butler lets him out of the back of the car. He's never, ever had a job like this before, ever. But throughout the movie, we see how smart he is. We know he can do this job, but he has that imposter syndrome. He's not so sure. And he says to Coleman, the butler, what if I can't do this job? What if I'm not what they expected? And he says, just be yourself, sir. They can't take that away from you. Now, if that was the only lesson, that's a great lesson. But what I saw in that was, because he was so smart and he wasn't sure he could do it, I say that, confident people question themselves, arrogant people question others. And it's an important lesson to remember when you go to start your own thing, whatever it is. You need to be confident. But there's a line between confidence and arrogance. And when you're an entrepreneur, if something goes wrong, it's probably because of something that you did. And even if it wasn't, you have to be in the mindset to take responsibility. Remember, this is your, for lack of a better word, since you're coming up here very shortly, this is your baby. And figuratively and literally, it's your baby. And so regardless of the mistake that occurred or the thing that might have happened, it's your responsibility to take responsibility and then correct it. You can't reach out and start blaming other people. That you can do that in the corporate world. People do it every single day. But this is you, and no matter what happens, but that's what confident people do. That's how you're going to get better. At the end of the day, you have to question yourself and say, was there something I could have done better? I didn't get that piece of business. What could I have done better? Arrogant people question others. They say, nope, couldn't it? No, that was the client. That was the potential client's fault. They just don't know what they were missing. You have to take a step back and really analyze yourself on a pretty consistent basis.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really humbling experience. And I actually learned this from my business partner, who's very much well-versed in entrepreneurship and innovation. I learn a lot from him every day. But he really taught me that even the failures are learnings.
Mm-hmm.
You look at them as learnings,
yeah,
and use from that to do something better the next time around. In innovation and entrepreneurship, it's a lot of trial and error and learnings, and then doing it better in the next iteration. That's all what it's about. And if you don't go through that process and you just build, and don't have any learnings, you could actually build the wrong thing, spend a lot of time, spend a lot of money, and it not be the success that you really thought it could be. So really utilize those learnings.
Yeah, you actually hit on something about the building of things inside. And that happens with a lot of entrepreneurs. You're building inside of your bubble. And, there was in Dead Poet Society, Robin Williams' character, John Keaton, stands on a desk and he says, I'm standing on this desk. What do you kids know why I'm standing up on this desk? And, I stand up on here so I can see things. I'm paraphrasing here, but so I can look at things in a different way, different perspective, right? Get out of your bubble. And that's not just for entrepreneurs and work, but that's for life. It's as simple as, if you're a Starbucks person, go to Dunkin' Donuts and get your coffee one morning. If you're a Dunkin' Donuts person, go to Starbucks. You're going to see a completely different set of people. And you're probably going to have to go to a different part of town, a different area within your city or your suburb or whatever it is. It's as simple as that. But with entrepreneurs, it's the same thing. You can build inside of your bubble, and then you don't understand, how come people didn't like this, or why didn't they buy it, or how come it's not working? Well, you didn't get outside to explore what it is that you needed to build instead of just kind of building it yourself. And I want to point out one more thing too, along those lines. There is something to be said for planning. It is very important to plan. It's very important to do that when it comes to, when you were talking about build. Very important to plan. But there are moments where planning can sometimes almost be a detriment, where you have to trust yourself a little bit. And if you try to get to perfect, you'll never launch whatever it is you're trying to launch. Again, even if it's a personal brand. Better Off Dead with John Cusack, great dark comedy in the 80s. And at one point in the movie, he is up on top of this mountain with his best friend, and he's going to try to ski down this mountain because he wants to get his girlfriend back from the guy who stole her in his town, who's this great skier. And he's going to have a ski contest against him. And he's looking down this mountain and he's overwhelmed. He's like, I don't know if I can do this. And his best friend, who played this character in Revenge of the Nerds, that if you see him and you saw Revenge of the Nerds, you'd be like, I know that guy. He says, just go that way really fast. If something gets in your way, turn. And there are times in entrepreneurship where you do need to just go really fast. And when something gets in your way, you have to turn. there's just a balance between the planning and going really fast.
Execution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So when I found Chris, I really just thought that, this way of teaching life in leadership is so unique, pulling from these learnings that came from 80s pop culture. I'd never heard of anything before like that before. And I said, you know what, that's truly innovative. An innovative way to learn. A lot of my background is in teaching others, teaching adults. And I always like the philosophy of when you're teaching something and you can always relate it back to something that's really interesting or people can relate to, that they'll hold on to it so much more. And I really do think you've found that. And I'm sure you know that as well, since you've seen your own success in keynote speaking and the book, which, by the way, is supposed to be delivered today. So I'm really excited to dive into your book. Yeah.
Awesome.
So anybody else that has really enjoyed Chris's wisdom in pulling life lessons and learnings from the 80s, I encourage you to get his book, support him. And also, if you're looking for a unique way, if there's any listeners here who still are in, corporate America or run a team and are looking for leadership segments where he can come in and speak to your team in a unique way, I encourage you to reach out to him. So, where else can people find you? I'm going to put everything in the show notes so they can, easily go to links, but any particular places that you want to mention?
Yeah, and I do want to just touch on something where you talked about the teaching, because you're exactly right. That tangible, retainable piece of information, applying it or attaching it to something that you remember. And I say that some of the best lessons for life and work are going to come from the most unexpected of places and people. It's similar to what you said. I think when we're not expecting to learn, that's when we actually retain it the best. And 80s pop culture, characters like Jess Spicoli and Clark Griswold, and some of the ones that we talked about today, we don't expect to learn from them, but we can. So chrisclews.com, CHRISCLEWS.com. That's the best place if you want to get all the information on me. And of course, you're going to put in the show notes all of the social media for me, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. But if you really want to kind of get a good, hopefully you want to learn a little bit more about me, that's where you can do it. And then my 3 books are all on Amazon as well, but you can find them via my website also.
Anything lasting that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, the last lesson I have is the one that I share at the end of every keynote presentation. It means a lot to me. It's about advocating for something that's important to you in your life. And since we've thrown some things around here, you dated yourself much, much younger than me, but I dated myself. I never had kids, never got married. So I thought about my legacy and what it was going to look like. And I've always been around animal rescue. My grandmother was doing it in the 40s and 50s before it was even something that people really knew about. And my mom passed it down to my sister and I. So there's a Dead Poet Society, which I mentioned before. There's another line where he says, no matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world. And so I end my keynotes with this lesson from this line, because our words and ideas can get out to the world via social media and all, everything else in the palm of our hand. Right here, we have the great equalizer. We don't need to be a politician, an athlete, a celebrity, a world leader to get our words and ideas out. That's talking the talk. That's talking the talk. What are you going to do to walk the walk? The action that you're going to take to advocate for the thing that's important to you. Again, for me, it's animal rescue. So I have my Bodie boy. He's a pit mix rescue. He's, right here by me always. And he took me through a very rough patch that was unexpected in my life. Kind of almost like machine gun fire. These things just happened in rapid succession over the course of about 100 days back in 2022. I talk about his story and what he did for me, but I really say that, look, regardless of what it is, if you're going to advocate for something, talking the talk is great. You got to walk the walk. And as I mentioned, for me, it's animal rescue. I donate a portion of the proceeds from my speaking gigs and book sales to Wonder Paul's Rescue, which is the rescue that saved Bodie. And then I also volunteer with a smaller one called Off the Streets Bully Rescue. They focus on the bully breeds. Those guys are near and dear to my heart, the pit bulls that are so misunderstood. And I help transport those dogs that are in a bad situation, to safety at a ranch where they can get healed and then ready for adoption. I say that rescued is the best breed. I know adopt, don't shop is something that a lot of people hear, but I would just challenge anybody out there that if you're thinking about bringing a dog into your family or even a cat, just do yourself a favor and go to your local shelter. I don't think you'll leave without one. If you're in that position where you're ready now, and if you've thought about going to a breeder, just before you do, go to your local shelter. They're about 1.5 million. They're going to be euthanized this year, healthy, happy dogs, because there's no room for them. And imagine if all of us just went to the shelter first, what a difference that could make. And so that's my legacy. And if you hire me to keynote speak, I try to find a shelter rescue near my in-person events to volunteer at while I'm there. So I appreciate you letting me throw that out there. Yeah. Yeah. And it's great. And Warby Parker's another one. I mean, there's so many out there, but if you're doing that, think really hard about how you're going to do it, because it's one thing to, we see these big corporations, they have these massive checks they give to these big charities, which is great. I mean, listen, awesome, good, awesome. It's great. But there are so many smaller ones that are really doing the work, and they're probably in your local community. And what you can do for them is so much larger than the check that you give to whatever organization it is that you've raised money for, which again is awesome. I'm just saying there's probably something local in your community that could use the help. And so if you're trying to build your brand and build your company, why not attach yourself to something that you care about and find a way to do it at a level where it's going to make a huge difference in that particular organization's life and mission. Yes. Thank you so much for having me, Megan. Again, I appreciate the megaphone. It's awesome. I really do appreciate you reaching out. And thank you so much. And stay rad, everybody.